All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to be unpacking a truly fascinating classical, religious, and philosophical text, known simply as the First Word. We'll be exploring its incredibly rich, deeply layered allegories about human nature, our inherent vulnerability, and ultimately where we draw our strength from. If you've ever felt just a little overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the world and its endless demands, well, this text offers a completely different, highly structured lens through which to view your daily life. To kick things off, listen to how the author starts this whole thing. They write, "If you want to know what an inexhaustible strength, what an unending source of bounty this phrase is, listen to the following story." It's this fantastic, direct invitation to us. Basically, a hook designed to make us lean in and really experience the central parable that frames this entire philosophy. But before we get into the story itself, we really need to understand the core phrase at the heart of this explainer, Bismillah, which translates to "in the name of God." Now, what's so interesting here is that the source doesn't just treat this as some nice, polite thing humans say before eating a meal or starting a chore. It frames it as a fundamental, universal principle, the start of all things good. And shockingly, it's described as a phrase that literally all beings in the universe actively recite. To really grasp why this phrase is supposedly such a game changer, we kind of have to look at how the text views the human condition. And it lists these out: infinite impotence, infinite poverty, endless enemies, endless needs. I mean, it sounds a bit stark, right? But the foundational argument here is that human beings are deeply, fundamentally vulnerable. We're physically fragile, we require constant resources just to survive day to day, and we face unpredictability absolutely everywhere. And this stark reality, it perfectly sets up the absolute necessity for the solution we're about to see in the allegory. Section 1, Two Travelers in the Desert. So, the text introduces us to this famous allegory, comparing two very distinct characters, the humble traveler versus the proud traveler. Imagine for a second that they're both making this incredibly perilous journey through the vast, lawless deserts of Arabia. The humble traveler, well, he realizes his own limitations right away and decides to assume the name of a powerful tribal chief for protection. The proud, conceited traveler, however, he absolutely refuses. He relies entirely on his own ego, genuinely thinking he can handle whatever the desert throws at him. And honestly, the difference in how their trips go is night and day. It perfectly illustrates the real-world consequences of their mindsets. The humble traveler, because he's moving under the chief's name, is perfectly safe. If he runs into bandits, he just mentions the chief and they leave him alone. He's respected in literally every tent he enters. Meanwhile, the proud traveler, who refused that protection, is utterly miserable. The text describes him as constantly trembling before every minor threat, having to beg from everyone he meets just to stay alive. Okay, let's decode this allegory, because obviously the author isn't really giving us desert survival tips here. The desert represents the world, the traveler is the human being, so that's you and me, and the tribal chief represents the pre-eternal ruler, or God. The author is essentially making the case that trying to navigate the immense dangers and endless needs of life entirely on your own, fueled only by your own ego, is basically a guaranteed recipe for constant anxiety and metaphorical begging. To really hammer this point home, the text brings in a second, super practical metaphor: enrolling in the army. Think about a single lone soldier. On his own, he might not be a powerhouse at all, but when he acts in the name of the government, his entire posture changes. He fears no one. He speaks, he acts, and he withstands incredible pressure, not through his own personal muscle, but because he's relying on the immense power of the state standing right behind him. Adopting the phrase "in the name of God" is framed as enrolling in that massive cosmic army.
Section 2, How Nature Speaks.
This brings us to this absolutely beautiful philosophical concept from the text called the tongue of disposition, or lisan-i-hal in the original language. It's the idea that all living things communicate their submission to a higher power, not with literal spoken words, but through their actions, their incredible design, and their very nature. The text strongly argues that nature isn't just operating by random, blind chance. No, it's operating under a deliberate, divine command. Let's look at some of the really vivid examples the author gives. Picture tiny seeds and grains bearing huge trees on their heads, raising loads like mountains. I mean, have you ever actually stopped to think about the sheer physics of a massive oak tree growing out of a tiny, fragile little acorn? The text argues that the seed isn't pulling this off through its own microscopic power. It attributes this miraculous, gravity-defying strength entirely to the seed acting in the name of God. And this leads perfectly into how the text describes the trees themselves. They're called tray bearers. Think of it like a waiter at a really high-end restaurant. The waiter didn't cook the food, right? They're just filling their hands from the kitchen and gracefully offering the dish to you. The text says trees are doing the exact same thing. They fill their hands from a treasury of mercy to offer us fruit. They're simply the delivery vehicles, not the ultimate creators of the apple or the peach. Now, what's really wild is how this logic is applied to animals. Cows, camels, sheep, and goats are described as producing springs of milk, which the text beautifully calls the water of life from an abundance of mercy. Once again, the source pushes back hard against seeing this as merely some biological evolutionary function. Instead, it frames the milk as a pure, vital gift being actively presented to us by these animals, who are just acting as agents in the name of a divine provider. But honestly, maybe the most striking visual in this whole text is this concept right here. Soft, silk-like roots and rootlets effortlessly piercing and passing through hard rock and earth. If you've ever seen a delicate little green weed completely shatter a solid concrete sidewalk, you know exactly what this looks like. The author points out this stark visual contrast, soft silk breaking hard stone, to aggressively argue against purely materialistic views of nature. Physically speaking, heat and hardness are supposed to win every time. Yet somehow, the delicate roots easily conquer them. So, how does the text explain this total defiance of physics? It links this natural phenomenon to a famous scriptural reference. And we said, "O Moses, strike the rock with your staff and split the rock." The author brilliantly equates those delicate, silken plant roots to the miraculous staff of Moses. They aren't breaking the rock because they are physically harder than granite. They're doing it because they are conforming to a higher, miraculous command. The author makes a similar, really stunning comparison with leaves, referencing the verse, "O fire, be coolness and peace." Now, this refers to the historical miracle of the prophet Abraham surviving being thrown into a massive fire. The author asks us to look at delicate green leaves, leaves as fine as cigarette paper that somehow managed to stay moist and alive for months under the scorching, blazing summer sun. The text says those fragile leaves are basically reciting that exact same verse, surviving the extreme heat through a governing command, not just basic biology. Section 3, the 3 demands. The author actually breaks the fourth wall here, and I want to throw this direct question at you for a second. We so willingly give a price to humans, who are just the tray bearers, right? We pay the grocer, we pay the farmer, we tip the delivery driver. So what price does the true owner, the ultimate source of all these natural bounties, actually want from us in return? Well, the text lays out a really specific, highly structured price demanded by the true owner. Step 1 is remembrance at the start. Step 2 is reflection in the middle, and step 3 is thanks at the end. It's basically a complete start-to-finish roadmap for interacting with absolutely anything in the world. So what does that actually look like in practice? Remembrance is the simple, conscious act of saying, "In the name of God," before you begin something. Thanks is saying, "All praise be to God," when you finish. But that middle step, reflection, is probably the most profound part. It requires perceiving the food you eat and the nature all around you, not just as mundane, everyday fuel, but as priceless wonders of art and miracles of power. It's a massive call for deep, mindful appreciation of the world. To wrap up this whole framework, the author drops this incredibly striking metaphor. They write, "However foolish it is to kiss the foot of a lowly man who conveys to you the precious gift of a king and not to recognize the gift's owner." I mean, just imagine for a second, literally kissing the shoes of the postal worker who drops off a diamond ring, while completely, utterly ignoring the person who actually bought and sent you the ring in the first place. It sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the text concludes that it is 1,000 times more foolish to praise the apparent bestower of a bounty, like the tree, the animal, or the grocer, and forget the true bestower of that bounty. It's such a provocative thought about the actual nature of gratitude. It really makes you step back and question, where are you directing your own thankfulness in life? Are you just thanking the delivery driver, or are you recognizing the true owner? I hope this explainer gave you a fascinating new perspective to reflect on today. Keep thinking about it.